we are live. Hello and welcome to the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network. My name is Jonah Shiffman. I am joined, as I am every single week here, by John Kelly. We're going to be talking about UFC 271 going down this weekend at the Toyota Center in Houston, Texas. We got Israel Adesanya versus Robert Whittaker in a rematch for the middleweight title. We got the heavyweights, Derek Lewis and Tai Tuivasa in the co-main. Pretty fun card on tap this weekend. John, we've got 15 fights to break down. How are you doing, my man? I assume you are looking forward to this stacked pay-per-view week.
Absolutely, dude. It's going to be a fun week. I think it's going to be a really good card, honestly. I think there's going to be a lot of finishes, which we always like. But up and down the card, I just think it's really entertaining night of fights. I think it starts at 6. I wish it started a little bit earlier. I like the afternoon starts, but because it's a pay-per-view, you can't have your cake and eat it too. So I'll take what I can get, but it's going to be a fun slate on DraftKings. A couple betting spots I like as well that I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah, 6 o'clock Eastern time, 3 o'clock Pacific for the prelims this weekend, and then the main card, as always, at 10 o'clock Eastern for those pay-per-view starts. Actually, a card that I think the prelims are pretty fun as well. We've got a good main card, 5 fights, obviously, on the pay-per-view main card, but I think the prelims will be a lot of fun, a lot of violence. I only have 2 bets so far on the week. John, I'm not sure how many you've put in to the bet tracker so far, but a week where I think there's a lot of angles to play, both for DFS, for underdog pick'em formats. I saw you put out a video for that. So just kind of a week where I feel like there's a lot of spots to attack and just a plethora of different avenues. Do you feel kind of similarly?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, don't even get me started on the underdog lines. I mean, my God. But we won't get into that too much. If you guys want to see that, go check out my video. It's up on my YouTube page. But yeah, excited to talk through the 15 fight matchups with you.
Yes, sir, my man. All right, let's get it started here. We got Jeremiah Wells in the first fight of the night as a pretty considerable favorite. He's minus 225. He's $9,100 on DK, and he takes on UFC debutant Blood Diamond, who's plus 185, 7.1K. We'll go with Blood Diamond. That is not the official name listed by the UFC, but it's on DK, a bunch of other places, and it sounds way cooler than his real name. So Blood Diamond making his UFC debut. He's 3-0 in MMA. He fights out of City Kickboxing alongside Israel Adesanya and Carlos Olberg, both of whom are also on this card. He comes into this fight as a pretty decent underdog. I think he's the more interesting fighter to talk about than Jeremiah Wells, who we did see kind of make good on that UFC debut against Warley Alves last year in the summertime. But Blood Diamond, first fight in about 365 days. It's been about a year since he fought. He only has one MMA fight since 2018. I went back, I did some tape on him. There's not a ton of footage out there, really just one full fight that's available to watch. His striking is clearly good. Like, you can tell he has a kickboxing background. He throws a lot of teeps up the middle. He goes to the body a good amount. I like his striking. Pretty unorthodox, those from weird angles, mostly up the middle, though, which I really like, especially for a guy who we think his kryptonite will likely be getting taken down. He does a good job keeping his opponents at bay and at distance. So I think Blood Diamond's striking is pretty decent. There's not a ton of tape on him grappling. I will say in the fight that I did watch against a guy in the Australian regional scene, Gillies, 5-4, has only really fought in external MMA. Blood Diamond got taken down one time. He did a decent job just scooting straight to the fence immediately and getting up, but not necessarily didn't inspire a ton of confidence that he would be able to survive a grappling onslaught from a guy like Jeremiah Wells, who's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, trains out of a pretty solid gym. John, I'll let you get into that a little bit more, but Jeremiah Wells is someone who I think is tough to trust as a big favorite because he does have the tendency to get a little crazy in there. But skill for skill, I think Wells is the much more well-rounded fighter in this spot. But I wouldn't be surprised if Blood Diamond, goes out there and gets a knockout win this weekend. I'm not betting it just because there's not a ton of data, but I would say my advice to people is don't sleep on the striking of Blood Diamond here. But I do expect Jeremiah Wells to kind of go out there, be the more well-rounded fighter, put together a game plan that likely gets the fight to the ground at some point and likely ends in a finish for the favorite out of Philly. So, John, anything for you here in the first fight of the night? I know you have backed Jeremiah Wells in the past. I'm sure you're excited to see him back in the cage. What are your thoughts on the first fight of the night?
Yeah, I got to represent my Philly guy. Jeremiah Wells trains out of Henzo Gracie. I like Wells. I agree with you that, he's the style of fighter that you typically don't want to trust as a big favorite. But honestly, this matchup, I don't even have that concern. Like, I think he's better pretty much everywhere. You mentioned Blood Diamond comes from a kickboxing background, not even like a super great kickboxer or anything like that. I mean, he was above average, but that's basically it. His striking style's kind of awkward in my opinion. Like it's like he's very long and like gangly, and he does have some tools, but it's just, I don't know. It's not the cleanest in my opinion. And against a guy like Wells, who's going to be much more explosive, does have more power. And then you mentioned the main thing is like, if he wrestles here, and I think he probably does, he's going to look like a massive favorite. Like, I think he takes him down. I think we see a top time clinic. I think he finds a finish on the mat as well. So I like Jeremiah Wells on DraftKings. I like a lot of guys on DraftKings because we have so many fighters to choose from. There's obviously going to be more options that should score well, and I think he's going to be one of them. So I'm definitely going to be targeting him quite a bit. And I actually did I parlayed Wells with Alex Perez, who we'll get to later in the card. But that so far, that's the only action I have. I'm waiting on FanDuel to release the props for this fight. I know they had like an early under 2.5 that was like absurdly off market. And shout out to Danny Lags. I know him and a few other people just absolutely nuked that line. Sean Orr, shout out to him too. I know he was on that as well. Wish I got on that, but obviously I was late to the party. But I'm waiting for FanDuel to release. FanDuel shook after those guys took them for all they're worth, and they just haven't released the props yet for this fight, because I do want to bet a Wells inside the distance prop, or if depending on what they open the sub line at, I think that's probably more likely than a knockout. But either way, whatever one is better, I'm probably just going to take that one and hope that's the way that he finishes, because I think he does finish.
Yeah, bad news for you is I think that the Wells sub line, I think the books are keen to it. It's like plus 175, plus 160. So unfortunately, not as great a number as I think you would probably want, but maybe FanDuel comes out with another off-market number. We got something to snipe there in the prop market.
I was going to say, you never count FanDuel out, man. They might open like a plus 300 or something absurd. We'll see.
I would certainly not put it past them. But yeah, keep an eye out in the FTN bets tracker for when that market does come out, and John will be sure to make a play in the market if he sees value. Let's move on to the second fight of the night here. We got Sergey Morozov. He's minus 210, $9,000 flat on DK against Douglas Silva. Andrade, who comes back as a plus 175 underdog here. He's 7.2K. This is an interesting fight, John, because I think the market has kind of totally shifted its view on Sergey Morozov, who went into that fight against Khalid Taha as a small betting underdog his last time out and just really dominated the fight. I mean, he had, I think, 6 takedowns, 9 minutes of control. He outstruck Taha at distance. That, if you do all those things, you outstrike your opponent at distance, you take them down multiple times, and you're able to stay in dominant position for almost 2/3 of the fight, you're going to win by a lot. And now the market has kind of shifted totally on him. Underdog his last time out, now a 2-1 favorite here against a guy much more accomplished in Douglas Silva de Andrade. I will say that Sergey Morozov, I think, is pretty talented for this weight class. I regret not betting him his last time out. I put out a tweet about that. I was considering playing him. I never pulled the trigger. Certainly was a lot of value in that spot against Taha. I'm not sure there's a ton of value at minus 200 this weekend, although the more I look into the fight, the more I think that Morozov is the side, even at the current betting market. Douglas Silva de Andrade is someone who he's tough to judge because his last 3 losses are to very good fighters. I mean, I think he lost to Leon Murphy, Piotr Jan, and then Rob Font as well at 135 pounds. Most guys who get Douglas Silva de Andrade to the ground are able to keep him grounded. He doesn't have a great get-up game. I expect Sergey Morozov to go to the grappling early on in this fight and rack up a good amount of control time here. I think that Douglas Silva de Andrade is certainly talented and has the skills to win this fight, but he's 36 years old at 135 pounds. Pretty big guy for the weight class. Like, I don't think his weight cut is really easy. It looks like he doesn't have a ton to lose when he gets in there on fight night, even after rehydrating. I just think it's going to be tough for him to keep up with Morozov's grappling. So I like Sergey in this fight. I also thought his underdog price of 30, I think it was 36.5 significant strikes in their pick'em format, was just too low in a fight that I think will go the distance. I think Sergey will be able to be competitive on the feet and then obviously get the fight to the ground and land a little bit of damage from top position. So no action for me in the betting market here, but I do think the price is accurate. Kind of lean towards Morozov even at minus 200 if I had to bet a side. John, any interest from you here?
Yeah, I think this is a really fun fight. I agree with you that Morozov seems like a pretty solid prospect. Early on in the week, I thought maybe there'd be a chance I might get involved on the other side, in the Silva de Andrade side, just because he is, super well rounded. Like you said, only really lost to elite guys in this division, but at the same time, like, I do have some concerns as well. Like you mentioned, he's probably going to get taken down multiple times here. And it's kind of funny, like, you go back and watch his tape. It's like half the time he gets taken down, he's just, accepting position on his back for extended periods. And then there's other spots where he actually looks pretty good. Like he reversed position against Leron Murphy. What was the other one I was thinking of? Drawing a blank, but like going back and watching through multiple fights, there were times where he did show some tools where I'm like, okay, you know, maybe I am interested. And you know, he's going to bring a pace on the feet and fight for your money. So I don't hate it. I think there could be some value there, but at the same time, like I haven't bet it because I can kind of just see it being like maybe a competitive fight, but one that Morozov probably wins almost every time, if that makes sense. So that was kind of where I struggled with it. So I didn't end up betting him. Like I said, I was kind of interested at 185. I think it's actually come down a little bit since then. I think, yeah, DraftKings has a 175. So yeah, I mean, this one, I would just say target Morozov on DraftKings if you think he lands multiple takedowns, but overall, you know, maybe a couple small stabs on Douglas or on Silva de Andrade if you think that he pulls off the upset, but that's if you're running multiple lineups.
Yeah, I think he's not necessarily a guy who I'm forcing in there at 7.2K. Honestly, not even sure I'll get overweight since I like the Morozov side so much more, especially on DraftKings. But 7.2K certainly has upside considering the price point that he lies at currently. Let's move on to the next fight here. We're entering your wheelhouse. We got a Dana White Contender Series alum here. Basically a pick'em fight. We got AJ Dobson -110, Jacob Malcoon -110. You search around the market, you can get each guy about -105, but we'll call it straight pick'em -110 right now. They are the fight on DraftKings right in the mid-range. We got AJ Dobson 8.2K, Jacob Malcoon 8K flat here. And John, the floor is yours, my friend. AJ Dobson, KO victory on Contender Series last year, makes his UFC debut here. So took a little bit of was it early on favorite, I should say, and that Jacob Malcoon took a decent amount of money in the market, brought this fight down to a pick'em after originally being like in the +130 range on the open. So curious your thoughts on kind of AJ Dobson as a prospect, and then obviously the fight this Saturday night.
Yeah, so this is one of the fights that I think is going to be a banger. You know, you mentioned it. AJ Dobson fought on Contender Series. I think I backed him on Contenders as an underdog against Hashim Arcega. I think some old dude that had a padded record, but basically, yeah, and hadn't fought for like 2 years or something like that. But yeah, Dobson's just one of those guys where he just fights like a madman. Like, you know, he's going to bring it. The guy's super tough. He fights at a pace where he's looking to get you out of there early. And I have a strong suspicion that if he doesn't, you might have a strong chance at getting him out of there early. And I know that hasn't happened yet because he's undefeated, but his level of competition has also been extremely low, including that Dana White Contender Series fight. We haven't seen much of his defensive grappling and wrestling. I think there's like maybe one fight on the regional scenes early on years ago. You can't really take too much from that against a guy like Jacob Malcoon, who, you know, in his last fight that he got a win, that was clearly the game plan against Al Hassan, was just to stick to him like glue, take him down repeatedly. Malcoon is a decent grappler. I believe he's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So yeah, I mean, this is an interesting matchup because on one hand, it's either you think Dobson comes out like a madman and hurts Malcoon. We saw him get hurt in the Phil Haas fight. That's certainly in play here. Or you think the wrestling, after Dobson probably gasses himself out, the wrestling wears on him. Malcoon lands multiple takedowns and gets his hand raised, or maybe finds a late finish himself. So I'm going to have exposure to both sides on DraftKings. I was semi-interested in the Malcoon side, like you said, when it was like +130, +140 or whatever, somewhere in that range. But now at a pick'em, like, I have zero interest just because it's like he really only has that wrestling, and I'm not even convinced that his wrestling is all that good. And we just don't know how good Dobson's defensive wrestling is just because we haven't seen it. I don't think it's great, but again, we just don't have enough data to go off of. So it's kind of a big question mark, other than the fact that I do think it's going to be high paced, and I think it's going to be well scoring on DraftKings because it's either one guy finishes early and gets knockout, most likely, or Malcoon gets a wrestle heavy decision or a late finish. So either guy can score well. Malcoon's cheaper, so I'd probably lean that way, but I'm not shying away from Dobson whatsoever because his first round finishing equity is very high, and we know we want to chase that on FanDuel and DraftKings and FanDuel. If you're playing there, it's exaggerated for first round finishes over there. So might even have more of the Dobson side just for that finishing equity.
Absolutely. And shout out to our guy Connor, who does really good work with both our MMA product, NFL, NBA, NASCAR stuff. In the chat, he'll be hanging out in Discord, I'm sure, on Saturday night in the FTN Daily Discord. So shout out to him, saying it's a great fight to target on DraftKings in the live chat. Most certainly agree with that take. Originally I thought that Jacob Malcoon was a pretty good value at plus 130. I still think anybody who got it in at those early prices did a good job. Obviously, the line has reflected the sharp action there. I will say that, AJ Dobson, not a ton of footage out there. I thought his Contender Series fight, he looked really, really kind of out of sorts in a way that was effective against that level of competition. But like you mentioned, John, was kind of bordering on the too aggressive, to the point where like he was falling off balance from his own punches, like getting just very over aggressive in every aspect of the game. And I don't think Jacob Malcoon is great, but we do know that he is able to be dedicated to a game plan, right? Like we've seen him wrestle. He just against Razak, I mean, he had a game plan to go wrestle, and he absolutely did it for the entirety of the fight. Basically took 0 minutes all from his game plan there, which I respect. And, Jacob Malcoon, I don't think is a great wrestler. I mean, like, he's Australian. I don't think he's like this world-class wrestler who's going to out-wrestle a ton of high-level guys in the UFC. But you give him guys like AJ Dobson, like Abdul Razak Al Hassan, who have flaws in their game. And I think he's going to be able to employ game plans that lead him to wins, maybe more so than his skill level even deserves. But at a pick-em price, man, I do respect Dobson being a really good athlete. He is explosive early on. I will say that I think his best win actually became before Contender Series against Kalen Hill. And Kalen Hill, for those of you guys who don't know, didn't fight in the UFC, but was once upon a time like a minus 600, minus 700 favorite at close against Impa Kasaganai on Contender Series. Impa upset him, obviously made the UFC, and has since been cut. But even in that fight for AJ Dobson, which I think is the best on his record, almost from the opening glove touch, if you go back and watch that fight, he hurt Hill. So I think he's just very reliant on hurting his opponents early. And against a guy like Malcoon, I mean, we've seen Malcoon in the Phil Hawes fight, got pretty much caught in the first minute of that fight. Would not be shocked at all to see Dobson go out there and get a first round finish. But for me, at the current market, I'll pass. I will say Dobson's takedown line, like 2.5, 2 on underdog pick'em format. John, I know you did your video there, so I'm not trying to steal the thunder, but I know that was something you were on as well. He did look to take down his opponent on Contender Series a bit, but I do think that Jacob Malcoon is definitely the stronger wrestler here, both offensively and defensively. Would you agree, John?
Oh, for sure. And honestly, I don't think that's going to be the game plan here. He's kind of a guy that just sort of spams everything. It's like
Right.
that meme where people are like, when you're figuring out the buttons in UFC or whatever, and you just mash everything. That's literally how he fights. And we saw that with the Valdez Frivola fight. Like, that's fun. It's exciting, but it's probably going to get you finished at this level. Not saying that it'll hurt him here against Malcoon. I don't know if Malcoon can finish him, but at some point, I think he's going to get finished. But to answer your question, yeah, I don't think he's going to wrestle much against Malcoon.
Yeah, I certainly think an AJ Dobson first round knockout win would do pretty good things moving forward in terms of like fading him and the equity we could get potentially down the road, but we don't got time to talk about all that. Let's move on to the second city kickboxing product on the card. We got Carlos Olberg, currently a minus 255 favorite here, $8.9 thousand on DK against Fabio Charon, who comes into this fight 0-2, likely fighting to keep his job in the UFC. He's plus 215, $7.3 thousand here. And, my notes on Fabio Charon are that he's pretty bad at most things. UFC debut, went out there, got submitted by Alonzo Menafield, got knocked out by William Knight in a fight that didn't really inspire confidence from either guy. He's a guy who's fought in LFA before. Originally coming into the UFC, I thought that Charon would have a chance to beat some low-level guys, but the more I watch him, man, he just doesn't have a ton of killer instinct, doesn't really hit hard at 205, is not very physical, doesn't go to his wrestling often. His striking is like fine, but he doesn't hurt his opponents enough for a weight class where you really need to do damage to your opponents. And I don't know. I just don't think that Fabio Charon is really UFC level at this point. And Carlos Olberg is the guy who lost his UFC debut to Kennedy in kind of crazy fashion. I mean, he landed 146 significant strikes in this weight class, which is super impressive. And then obviously gassed out, got knocked out himself in the third round. But I mean, a fresh Carlos Olberg, which I think we're going to see for the majority of this fight, considering that I don't think Fabio Charon has taken that type of damage that his opponent did last time out. I don't know. I expect Olberg to go out there, win this one pretty cleanly. I was actually interested in laying the chalk at like minus 200, but I didn't get around to taping the fight until the line has already moved to like the minus 250 range. But I do think that like Carlos Olberg is parlay material. I'm not a big parlay guy, but I understand people are watching the pay-per-view. You want degenerate action on a bunch of the fights. I think you could do a lot worse than chucking in some Carlos Olberg money line into those parlays. So I think he's clearly a big favorite here. the bigger question, and John, maybe you don't think he's a big favorite, but assuming you do, assuming you think that Olberg is the side here, what are we doing on DraftKings? Because this fight is currently lined as if Olberg finishes inside the distance about 60 to 65% of the time. I'm not sure he finishes that often here, but $8,900 is going to have to put up a pretty good score in order to get optimal with 30 fighters in the player pool this weekend. So I guess I'm just kind of curious thoughts on the fight, and then also more specifically Olberg at $8,900 on DK. How are you planning on handling that?
Yeah, I really don't have much to add from you. I think this is Olberg's fight to lose, obviously. Kind of unfortunate for him against Kennedy Nzechukwu, dominating that fight just to the point where he just lands so many strikes that he gets so tired and gets finished himself. I doubt Fabio Charon can handle that type of damage that Kennedy Nzechukwu did. Charon's been finished in both of his UFC fights, right? So, and one was like the Menafield submission was literally like, I think they listed it as like the Von flu, but I think it was literally just like him smushing him with his shoulder. Like,
pressure.
Yeah, like it was pathetic. And Sharon's supposed to be like more of a grappler too. So that's why it was even more embarrassing. Because grappling's like probably his best, like his strong suit, but we just haven't seen it. And I just don't think he has much on the feet. He's super low volume, doesn't seem to have a ton of power, and he just kind of stares at his opponents and waits for them to get hit. He'll throw like one strike per minute, it seems like. So he's just not somebody that I have a ton of confidence in. Regarding the DraftKings strategy, I think Olberg is in play for sure, because we know he's probably going to fight at a high pace. You mentioned he probably has one of the better inside distance lines on the entire slate. But I could also see him, having more of a reserved approach. And again, we have 15 fights on the card. There's multiple guys that I like in that expensive range. So it's going to be one of those things where I want some exposure, but I'm not sure that I want all the exposure. Like he's not going to be a core play for me. I'm not even sure if I want to be overweight to the field, honestly, because I'm expecting him to be semi-popular, maybe around 25, 30%, whatever. I'd probably look to be right around there or maybe a little bit under even.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I'm not really sure my approach yet, but I'll figure that out before Saturday night. And obviously, both of us will be in the FTN Daily Discord. It's free to join. Come hang out. We'll be talking about the slate, sweating the fights probably on Saturday night. So come through and hang out there, and we'll kind of update how we feel about the Olberg fight as the week goes on. Let's move on here to a pretty good fight at lightweight, at least for the early prelims here, John. We got Renato Moicano minus 160 here against Alexander Hernandez, who comes back plus 140. DraftKings prices have Moicano at 8.5K. Hernandez is 7.7K. And this is a fight that I've kind of struggled with all week. These are two guys who I feel like for as good or as high as their upside can be, we've seen Moicano get really big fights before. Alexander Hernandez, obviously someone who debuted with a bang and had a lot of hype kind of towards the beginning of his UFC career. For as high as those ceilings may be, feels like we're dealing with really low floors here. Renato Moicano has struggled repeatedly early on in fights, taking damage. 155 pounds, I'm not sure is going to help out his durability. And then Alexander Hernandez is someone who, I don't want to get ahead of the analysis here, but man, Alex Hernandez, some days it just seems like against the Mike Breedens of the world, the guys who he knows he's better than, the guys like Chris Grutzmacher, where he's a minus 300, minus 400 favorite, he treats them the way he should as a minus 400 favorite. He looks good doing it, but it feels like every time that Alexander Hernandez faces adversity, he just seems to wilt in every single spot. The Thiago Moises fight comes to mind, Drew Dober as well in recent memory. So I guess that's just kind of more and like the narrative-y side as opposed to kind of how the fight will play out skill-wise here. So I don't know. I have trouble kind of gauging where either guy is at because I think so much of it kind of is how the fight is going. Because if Moicano survives early, he's usually good to go. But if Hernandez gets in trouble early, he usually just goes like a straight downhill spiral. So I don't know. Maybe I'll look to get involved in the live market here. I'll save my prediction for after your analysis, John, but I just wanted to get that out there that I kind of struggle with Alexander Hernandez specifically to gauge where he's at leading into fights against solid opponents. And this is the best opponent he has fought in a little bit. So, John, your thoughts here on Moicano versus Hernandez? Any strong lean? We've seen action pretty much on both sides throughout the week. Line has been bouncing back and forth. So I'm curious if you're planting your flag on either side.
I wouldn't say I'm planting my flag. I'm not super confident in the matchup. One thing I am confident in, though, is that I do think Moicano is being a little bit overvalued here. Just because, when you talk about Alexander Hernandez, like the skill set has always been there, right? It's always been more of a mental thing for him. He came in, he was the hot new prospect, talking all that smack, and then Cerrone just humbled him. And ever since that, it seems like he's either been in his own head or at times like kind of scared to get hit. Like it seemed like he's fighting fearful at times, which is obviously not a good look. And then there's other bouts where he's just not doing enough. You know, the last time I think the last time he was in Texas was the robbery decision against Francisco Trinaldo, where literally nothing happened. I think he scored like 40 points in a win on DraftKings.
And that was before they lessened the points per significant strike landed.
Yeah.
So even like now, I think it would be even
less. I don't even know if he would have broke 40, and you get 30 for the win itself. So it's like literally nothing happened. So obviously those aren't good things. Now, what is good about him is, like I said, he's super well rounded. When he is being aggressive and fighting confident, he's super technical. Got heavy leg kicks. He's got fast hands. Obviously, has decent, solid wrestling base. He's a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. The guy is well-rounded. It's just like, is he going to put it all together? I honestly don't know. And that's why I haven't backed him in the spot, even though I do think this is an either play the underdog or just don't play it at all, because Moicano, while he's, super technical himself, he does get pretty reckless, especially on the feet. And this is a guy who's been knocked out multiple times. I don't really trust his chin too much. I trusted it quite a bit against guys like Jai Herbert, who's got a fight coming up, by the way, against Mike Davis, where Mike Davis is going to, do some work there. But yeah, I trust him in those style matchups, but against somebody who's able to probably neutralize a lot of what he's going to do, and also has the potential to make him pay for getting reckless in those spots. Like, I don't know, man. I wouldn't be surprised if we see like a shockingly good performance from Hernandez, but at the same time, like, I also wouldn't be surprised if we just see like the typical, man, this guy's so good, why isn't he doing enough? Like, what is going on? So I don't know. This is going to be one that I'm just going to sit back and watch and just kind of take it as a data point moving forward. But I'm kind of leaning towards the underdog in terms of DraftKings. I just think there's better fights to target. I don't think we see a finish. Maybe we do if Hernandez catches the chin of Moicano, but more than likely, I think this is probably going over. And I just think there's better fights to target in that range on DraftKings.
Glad you mentioned the fight going over. There has been some steam to the over throughout fight week. A bunch of sharp money coming in on that side. No action for me either in the betting market. I'll pick Renato Moicano, but I picked Renato Moicano in a lot of fights where he's disappointed me before. So like I mentioned, nothing pre-flop, but maybe I get involved in the live betting markets once I kind of get a good gauge for where both guys are at kind of mentally in the fight here. Let's move on to the last fight of the Fight Pass early prelims. We got Martinez here as a big underdog. He's plus 235, 6.9K on DraftKings, and Ronnie Lawrence minus 300, 9.3K as a pretty substantial favorite here. I mentioned Martinez first here, John, because I saw you have a play, a prop market or a prop play on him in the FTN Bets Tracker. 12-1 odds. Talk to me about what you're looking at back here in Martinez versus Lawrence.
Oh,
get me out of here. You go, big.
My bad. I'm trying to go full screen because the real ones know the full screen plays never lose, right? Other than Dennis Bondar last week, who had the nasty elbow injury, didn't look good even before that. But we're on to this week. Forget about that. The full screen plays never lose. Everybody knows that. This was kind of interesting because I think Ronnie Lawrence, everybody knows I'm super high on him. Everybody is, like, everyone loves him. I call him the mini Merab Dvalishvili because of his work rate. He's constantly looking to land takedowns. He's got that relentless pressure, just peeling his opponents to the ground, staying busy on top. Did just recently get his black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well. His striking's not terrible. His defense could be better, but outside of that, the kid has all the tools. Landed 12 takedowns on Dana White Contender Series, landed 8 in his debut, in his UFC debut. And I think that's what's going to happen here more than likely. So I like Ronnie Lawrence. I think Ronnie Lawrence could be a potential parlay piece in this spot. And I bet a prop on Martinez. And I did that because Martinez is a guy who we know has power, right? But that's pretty much all he has. Like, we saw him get semi-exposed in that Guido Canetti fight. And here I think he gets exposed as well, but he does have knockout power. 8 of his 9 wins have come by knockout. 5 of those has come inside the first round. And again, the red flag with Lawrence to me is his defensive striking. He does get careless. He can be hit. Even in, I can't remember if it was Contenders or his debut, but he had a big old mouse on his face because he eats shots like that all the time because his defense is not great while the fight is playing out at range. So I think Martinez will have a small window, and I think that's going to be early to hit his win condition, and I believe that's a first-round knockout. So at 12-1, it's just one of those spots similar to the Erosa-Peterson fight. Took the big shot on Peterson by knockout, didn't get there, but I could just see that being one of these things where we're gonna at least have an opportunity to cash a number that should probably be like plus 800, something like that, and it's 12-1. So I'm just always going to take those shots. This one's a small one, half a unit over on FanDuel. Martinez by first round knockout, but I think you can also like that's a slight hedge if you have a big play on Ronnie Lawrence, which I think could also be value because if he doesn't get knocked out, I think he dominates the fight. I'm also considering playing Lawrence by submission at plus 750. So I haven't fully finished with this fight yet. That was just the first one where I know the number was off, so I played it there. But I think you could do worse than a stab at Lawrence by submission at plus 752. Like I said, he should have a grappling advantage. We know he's going to land multiple takedowns. And obviously he's like the best play on DraftKings. You know, he scored like 140 in his debut. He does so much with those takedowns and control time, etc., ground and pound. He's going to score well either way. And if he loses, I think Martinez is going to knock him out and he's going to score well. So I'm likely going to have one of these guys in most of my lineups. What about you, Jonah?
Yeah, so it's interesting. One thing I just wanted to mention real quick off the top is, the Mana Martinez fight against Guido Canetti his last time out. Certainly were some circumstances surrounding the fight. We don't like to get like too narrative based, but he missed weight. He was dealing with the loss of his coach. I was actually at that fight and I sat next to his mom and she was telling me like he was really going through it. He was having a tough time mentally like prior to the fight. And you can kind of see that early on. Like he's not a fast starter typically, but like an extremely slow start in a spot where a lot of people expected him to dominate the fight early. So I just wanted to mention that just kind of like Mana Martinez, I don't think round 1 of his fight last time out is really what to expect from him as a prospect. He did turn it up in rounds 2 and 3. And I kind of expect that to be kind of more of his mantra going forward. That said, John, you laid out like 3 or 4 different fun prop plays to play. Maybe I'm just a square juice boy here, but I actually laid it on the money line with Ronnie Lawrence. I bet him at minus 275 to win a unit. I think you kind of broke down my reasoning even while you were describing the play for Mana Martinez. You got 12-1 on the KO, but or KO1, I should say. But to me, that's kind of his one way of winning the fight. Like Ronnie Lawrence pushes a really tremendous pace. Is a good wrestler. We've seen Mana Martinez struggle with inferior grapplers. A Contender Series comes to mind where, he got caught in a nice submission, but like the transition getting there doesn't seem super comfortable. Does Mana on the ground. And I just think that Ronnie Lawrence is a guy who I want to be high on. I want to buy high on him, even at minus 300, coming off of 2 pretty dominant performances in an octagon before. I will say the big cage isn't like a huge help for Ronnie here, but I don't think it's something that is like going to deter me from a play or really changes a ton going into the fight. I just kind of like when the wrestlers are able to get their opponents to the cage really quickly in that small apex cage. So for me, it's a play on Ronnie Lawrence, minus 275. I think even minus 300 is fine. I think he dominates this weekend. Obviously makes for a really strong play on DraftKings. Probably will project as the highest scoring fighter, despite it only being a 3-round fight. One of those guys where you're low key like rooting for him not to finish the fight because he just scores so many more points doing everything else besides finishing. But I think he has some finishing upside, but more than likely just kind of wins a one-sided decision and pulls away late or gets a 3rd-round finish. So a little bit of disagreement here, but I think we're kind of similar lines of thinking and how the fight will play down, just different approaches on how to get our money down. So let's move on here, John, to Maxime Grisham. He's a minus 165 favorite here against William Knight. Comes back plus 145. The DK prices are Grisham, 8.7K, William Knight, $7,500 on DraftKings. John, I think Maxime Grisham might be value here this weekend at minus 165. My problem with him is that he's so underwhelming at times. We saw him, first of all, I thought he won his fight with Dustin Jacoby last time out, and I thought he outstruck him pretty cleanly, which is impressive at this weight class. Dustin Jacoby is a pretty solid striker. We saw Grisham drop him twice in that fight and also outstruck him just in pure distance strikes. But I think part of the reason he lost is because he can just be so like meh at times. Just his motor doesn't seem that high. He doesn't fight with a ton of enthusiasm. His big moments don't feel as big because oftentimes he'll pull back after the big moments. We saw him get the KO win over Antigulov. That's his only UFC win. His UFC debut is against Tybura, up a weight class on short notice, I think in Abu Dhabi. So I kind of don't put a ton of stock into that. But William Knight is just a guy who I don't think is very good for someone with a 3-1 UFC record. I mean, he's not a great wrestler. He's had a few takedowns, but we've also seen him exposed defensively wrestling before. His striking, he certainly carries a lot of power. I mean, you look at the guy, it's very clear that he carries a lot of power, but at the same time, like, I just don't think that he throws a ton of output. I think Grisham's just a way better mixed martial artist. The question is, do I want to pay minus 165 for a guy who feels like he doesn't capitalize on his big moments enough at a weight class where sometimes that's necessary? So I'm tempted at minus 165 on Maxime Grisham. Maybe you can talk me into it, or maybe you can talk me out of it, but I'm curious your thoughts here on this fight, John.
Yeah, I would definitely side with talking you out of it. Not that I don't think he can't win this fight, but I totally agree with you. The guy's super underwhelming. Like, he came over to the UFC with this great record, pretty much only lost to Ankalaev over like 17 fights in a row. That was the only loss on his record. Yeah. But it just doesn't look good to me. Like, since coming over in the UFC, I know he's bounced between heavyweight and light heavyweight, but I don't think he's looked great in either division, honestly. And he's super low volume on the feet. I talk about it all the time, is like these guys that don't do a lot, like not just with the striking, like that's one thing, but if they're never looking to land takedowns, to pressure, to literally do anything but strike, and they're still not doing enough striking, that's tough for me to back, like in almost any matchup. And there are some some specific cases where that won't be the case, but for the most part, like those type of fighters in general, I'm just not confident in, because Grisham, while he is much more technical than William Knight, I could see this being a fight where like he's just not doing more than just like jabbing and doing it with low volume at that. And William Knight could at least pressure him against the cage, try to get him to the ground. I don't think he's going to have a ton of success. Grisham, I think, has a little bit underrated takedown defense. And we talked about it before. William Knight, his wrestling is not very good. It's more of just like trying to get in the clinch and muscle his opponents to the ground, which I don't think is going to work here against Grisham, but I could be wrong. I definitely have more interest in Knight on DraftKings just because he is super powerful. So maybe he closes his eyes and lands a lucky punch like we've seen him do before. Or maybe his wrestling, it just works here, even though we don't think it's very good. He at least has that going for him. So I think he's clearly the better DraftKings play. So that's kind of how I'm going to attack it. But in terms of the betting market, I'm not going to back William Knight with my money, and I'm certainly not going to back Maxime Grisham with my money either.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm not enthused to make the play, so you might have just talked me out of it. And shout out to Pepe Silva, supporter of the show, in the chat, to answer your question. I think the answer is clearly William Knight. Let's move on here to Alex Perez versus Matt Schnell. Perez minus 380 in this spot. Matt Schnell comes back plus 290. And John, I saw you have a parlay in the tracker that features Alex Perez here as a pretty big favorite at minus 380 over Matt Schnell. Talk to me about the thought process here. Fight, I think we've talked about this fight on the pod before, has been scheduled and canceled. Alex Perez, I mean, it's like wasting years of his career as the best 125 on earth, waiting to fight Matt Schnell and likely dominate him. But that's your thought process behind the Alex Perez parlay piece.
Yeah, that's pretty much my thought process, is he's going to dominate Matt Schnell. Like pretty much wherever the fight goes, I think Perez is a better fighter. I basically think Schnell's only way he wins this fight, like he's not winning a decision. Like there's no outcome that I could see him winning a decision here. Like I just can't. So he's drawing dead to a finish, in my opinion. And that finish, like he doesn't have a ton of power. So I don't think he's knocking Perez out. So he's literally drawing dead to submitting Perez, which it wouldn't be like the biggest shock in the world, but I still would be surprised. And the reason I say it wouldn't be like the biggest shock is because Perez constantly leaves his neck out there when he's chasing those takedowns. But more than likely, I think Perez stays safe here. I think he lands multiple takedowns. I think he could finish Schnell on the mat. I think he could win a decision where he lands multiple takedowns. I just really think he dominates here. So I think he's pretty safe. I think he's a good play on DraftKings as well. Any of these guys that have the multi-takedown upside, but also a chance to finish as well, I'm just always going to, lean towards them on DraftKings. Obviously, he's expensive, but I do think it's warranted. He's right up there with Ronnie Lawrence as one of the better plays on the slate.
Yeah, and that makes sense. He is expensive. He's $9,600, obviously, but we've seen his upside. I think he's gone over 100 points 4 or maybe 5 times in his UFC career has Alex Perez. So I think he deserves to be a big favorite. John, by the way, just looking at your bet in the tracker, I think Alexander Romanov versus Ilir Latifi next week is
It's
off.
canceled. Yeah.
But whatever. So
I spaced out when I made that, and I was like, why is Romanov only minus 290 against Latifi? Because I think he dominates that fight. I don't even think it's particularly close. And then I went to add it to bet MMA, and it wasn't showing up. And then I looked it up, and I was like, oh yeah, that fight was canceled. Oh well.
Well,
so it's just a Perez and Wells parlay.
Yeah.
So
okay, that makes sense. That's yeah. Oh, I didn't even give my analysis for the fight. I've already talked about the fight on the show. You could go back and listen to like 2 episodes ago. Basically, I think Alex Perez is going to dominate. I think Alex Perez is really good. I think there's a slight chance that he gets caught in like a triangle or guillotine here, but seems pretty low, about 15 to 20%, which is basically what the odds indicate Matt Schnell's chances of winning the fight are. So I expect Alex Perez to go out there and get the job done. And DraftKings, one thing I will say is Schnell plays guard a little bit on the ground. He doesn't have a great get-up game. I wouldn't be shocked if Perez just kind of like gets on top and stays on top, which is usually good for DraftKings, but at 9,600 on a 15-fight slate could deflate his upside just a little bit. Not necessarily something that I'm like super passionate about, but I can't remember a fight where Schnell has been like mat returned multiple times. Usually he just gets stuck on his back and throws up like triangles for 5 minutes and let the round end. So I don't know. I think Alex Perez has a lot of success with leg kicks and takedowns and wins the fight. But I'm not super enthused to get overweight on him on DraftKings, considering his price tag. Let's move on to a fight that's been like weirdly controversial throughout fight week, John. And I think you may have a full screenplay here or something similar to it. I don't know. It looked to me like you were passionate about it early on in the week from some of the texts I saw. Maybe not. Let's talk about it. Casey O'Neill minus 400, $9,500 on DraftKings after winning her first 3 UFC fights here. She takes on the Happy Warrior in her retirement fight. Roxanne Mata-Ferry plus 300, 6.6K for Roxy on DraftKings. And John, I just made you go first in Perez versus Schnell, but I'll give you the floor again here. Any opinion? A lot of people looking to fade Casey O'Neill, your girl, with Roxy in this retirement fight. Big number to do so, but I know personally I'm not that excited to do it. Are you pulling the trigger here on any Roxy Mata-Ferry at minus or at plus 300, I should say, or no interest?
Yeah, Casey O'Neill's my girl, but I mean, these odds are kind of crazy to me. I didn't end up backing Mata-Ferry. I don't think I'm going to. I wasn't like super passionate about it. But I did, and I do kind of still think a small play is probably warranted. I don't know if I want to just burn money on Roxanne Mata-Ferry. I know, I think it was you that bet her in her last fight against Santos, or maybe it was somebody else that we know.
I mean, I've definitely lost some Roxy bets before. I feel like
maybe
a Rojo. Let me see.
Maybe that was it.
I'll pull up the history.
But I mean, the pain of backing somebody like that, and then it's like watching the fight play out, and you're like, oh, they have no shot at winning. Cool. But honestly, like I do think she does have a shot to win here. But I also think she might get dominated here. It's kind of tough. Like there's aspects of it where it's like, it makes total sense to me. She's much more battle tested. She's got a decent ground game herself, black belt in jiu-jitsu, a little bit of judo. I actually think she's a better striker than Casey O'Neill. And I guess that might be a hot take. I think she could jab O'Neill while the fight plays out at range. But O'Neill's probably going to look to close distance, muscle the fight to the ground. That's where I think it could get interesting, because if Casey O'Neill gets in a favorable position on Roxanne, like if she gets to mount, I do think she could probably finish the fight. She's super aggressive when she gets there. I kind of view her in the same light as Jillian Robertson. We both talk about her as like an aggressive finisher when she does get the fight to the mat. I think Casey O'Neill's the same way. And I know Mata-Ferry hasn't been finished in like, since the Ultimate Fighter fight, and all of her fights go to decision. But, she has been hurt. She has been cut up at times as well. And again, Casey O'Neill's just super, super aggressive. So I get that angle. But at the same time, I also get the angle of people backing Mata-Ferry. Like I mentioned, she does have the tools. We saw her reverse position multiple times against better grapplers than Casey O'Neill. I wouldn't be surprised if she landed a takedown or two, if she got in a favorable position. And then it's like, oh, well, maybe we jumped the gun on Casey O'Neill being, minus 400 or whatever against a veteran. But there was a couple things. The last thing I'll say is on the Mata-Ferry side, just a couple things in interviews that I didn't really like. Obviously it's a retirement fight, a lot of pressure on her. Her friend's been training with Casey O'Neill, so that's kind of in her head a little bit just based on what I've heard. And then she also said, like, which I don't weigh this stuff too much, but it's like, if I didn't really want to put money on her anyway, and then she says something like this, well, that's kind of like the, enough of a nudge is that she said she just wants to get the fight over with. And then she also said that anything that she's always wanted to do inside the octagon during a fight, she's going to try to do in this fight. And she mentioned like Imanari rolls, flying knees, spinning elbows, etc. So I don't know if she's going to fight the best game plan. And against a dangerous fighter like Casey O'Neill, I just don't think that's super smart. So all that being said, I think there's value on the underdog. I just don't know if I'm going to be hopping in that boat this weekend.
Yeah, well, it is true that I apparently donated half a unit on Roxy Mata-Ferry her last time out against Tyla Santos. I did win a lot of bets on that card. That was most certainly not one of them. I think O'Neill's probably going to roll here, which I know is the boring answer. Roxanne Mata-Ferry she still has skills, but just at 39 years old, man, she seems like so beaten down physically. And the good part about that for her, or there's nothing good about it, but the part that makes it so she can still be competitive is that she's never really been someone who excelled due to her athleticism. Like, she's always been, a technical fighter who won on her IQ, ability to implement good game plans, that sort of thing. The issue with Casey O'Neill, man, is I just think she's so much more physical here than Roxy Mata-Ferry. I honestly don't think that O'Neill is like at a striking deficit in this matchup. I know you mentioned you disagree with that take. And look, with Roxy, like, the thing is, are people really gonna bet on Roxy to win a fight via striking? Like, that's never really something she's done. She always grapples. She's gotten taken down 9 times in her last 2 fights, been controlled for like 11 of the 30 minutes, took a ton of brain damage against Tyla Santos in a fight that like probably didn't need to go the entirety of 15 minutes. I love Roxy. I hope she gets her moment after the fight. She's like a true women's MMA pioneer, but I just think it's a tough matchup for her on the way out. So I'll pick Casey O'Neill. I think she gets it done relatively dominantly here. I'm not sure I'm going to have a play. I feel like you're kind of guessing on inside the distance. Like, yeah, Roxy hasn't been finishing like a decade and a half. But at the same time, she's also taken a lot of damage and has never been as old and beat up as she is now. And with O'Neill decision, like, I don't know. I'm not sure. It feels like guessing. It feels like guessing in the prop market. So I just think O'Neill minus 400 is accurate. I'm not playing her. I'm not doing anything in the prop market. I just think she gets it done pretty dominant fashion this weekend. John, you ready to move on? We can go here to the main event of the prelims, the prelim headliner. We got Andrei Arlovski in the heavyweight division. Minus 155 against Jared Vanderaa, who comes back plus 135. DK prices here of Arlovski 8.3K, Vanderaa 7.9. To me, when I first saw this line, I had some interest in betting Andrei Arlovski. He's been a cash cow pretty much for like the last 3 or 4 years. He's been an underdog almost every time out. Seems to be really competitive in fights, win a lot of decisions. Obviously got nuked by Jairzinho Rosenstrike, dominated against Tom Aspinall. Not even dominated, but finished against Tom Aspinall. But other than that, he's looked pretty good. But the more I look into the fight, man, he's 43 years old at heavyweight. I know his chin has had like a resurgence. He's been kind of durable out of nowhere for a guy who has got knocked out double-digit times in his career. And I don't even think Jared Vanderaa is good, so I'm not betting him here. But man, Arlovski, 43 years old. I feel like it might be getting time to hop off the train here. Originally thought I'd be interested in riding it one last time, but I don't know. And it's also one thing I'll mention. It's tough to know where Jared Vanderaa is at skill-wise on the feet, because to me, I always thought he was someone who couldn't strike at all. And then the Justin Tafa fight came around, which is basically the only fight that he's had that in kickboxing range for the entirety of it in the UFC. And he landed like 121 strikes, was landing head kicks out of nowhere. Like, I don't really know what to expect from Vanderaa, because I think he's not a good striker, and I think the fight will stay standing. But at the same time, like, maybe I'm just wrong. Maybe he can go out there and land 120 strikes, in which case I'm sure it'll be more than Andrei Arlovski who will go out there and land his typical 50 to 65 strikes and hope the split decision goes in his way. So no action for me here with the heavyweights. John, anything for you in Arlovski versus Vanderaa?
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like I said this card's a banger. There's 15 fights to choose from, and they put literally the most boring one, pretty much the only boring one, I think, and they make that the prelim headliner. Like, if there's one fight that can get us pumped up for the UFC 271 pay-per-view, it's gotta be Arlovski versus Jared Vanderaa. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. I have no interest in this fight. I think probably Arlovski wins a 29-28 decision, but I'm not putting my money anywhere near him. You mentioned all the red flags. On top of that, like, Vanderaa, yes, I think he probably sucks, but also, there is something to be said for guys that are just willing to do more in fights. And I think he could be one of those guys, whether that's to his own detriment or not, we'll find out. But I don't know. I could just see it being like Arlovski being more technical, playing on the outside, landing some jabs, but Vanderaa pressuring him, maybe having a couple big moments and just constantly moving forward like a zombie. And maybe that convinces the judges. I don't know. It's just, it's not a fight that I have a strong take on. It's not a fight that I really even care to watch. If we were to lose one fight this week, I wouldn't mind if it was this one. But yeah, I think there's up and down the card, much better fights to target on DraftKings. So not going to waste my time with this one.
No disagreement from me. Let's move on to the main card here for UFC 271 on pay-per-view this weekend. And kicking it off is my boy, Bobby King Green. He's minus 140. Favorite status over Nasrat Haqparast, who comes back as a plus 120 dog. DK prices have Bobby Green at 8.4K, Nasrat at $7.8 thousand. And John, I'll let you go first here on the pay-per-view. I'll give you the floor for the King Bobby Green fight because I know you have a bet on this fight, the pay-per-view opener, obviously. So give us your thoughts on Bobby Green versus Nasrat Haqparast.
Yeah, we're going full screen, man. This is my biggest bet of the card. Is I laid it with Bobby Green at minus 142. This is just a spot where I think he's just pretty much better wherever the fight goes. Obviously, we think this fight is going to play outstanding more so than not. And I favor Bobby Green in the striking. I think he's a better boxer, both offensively and defensively. I think he has better footwork, clearly better defense. And I think having the wrestling upside in his back pocket, I think that's big here, especially after we saw Dan Hooker not only outclass Nasrat on the feet, but mix in those takedowns, land 3 takedowns. I think Bobby Green can do that as well. He's landed 1 or 2 takedowns in the majority of his UFC fights. And I just think that's clearly a path to victory for him here, even though I think he's going to be winning the minutes standing as well. Like, this is just a spot where I think Nasrat is kind of drawing thin to like maybe hurting Bobby Green, which I don't think is super likely. Bobby's historically pretty durable. So yeah, I don't understand the line movement in favor of Haqparast. I was happy to get involved in Bobby Green when I saw the line come down to a playable range for me. It's my biggest bet on the card. I bet Bobby Green to win 2 units at minus 142 on FanDuel. And I'm likely going to be adding a decision prop as well for probably half a unit. I do think it probably goes to decision, but I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't either. You know, Bobby Green likes to feed off the crowd energy, coming off a first round knockout against Alaquinta. Maybe he pulls off a finish as well, but either way, I just think Bobby gets it done. And yeah, I like him this week for sure.
Yeah, you know I always like Bobby Green, so no disagreements from me here. My biggest play on the slate, actually, and my second and final bet that I've made so far is I played the fight to go to decision at minus 160 on FanDuel Sportsbook for about 2 units. I honestly think the over here in Bobby Green Nasrat, or the goes to decision, I should say, is good until about like minus 220. I mean, I think it's like serious value in this spot. Nasrat has been to decision in 6 of his 8 UFC fights. His only loss inside the distance was when Drew Dober knocked him out as an underdog in the first minute. Shout out to Drew Dober for cashing me a ticket in that spot, but he knocked him out in basically the first minute. Nasrat's only got 1 KO in the UFC. Bobby's been to decision 9 of his last 10 fights, only finish over a pretty washed Alaquinta. I was at the Garden. I was certainly hyped that Bobby got the KO in round 1, but it was not something that I think is to be expected moving forward. Although, John, like you mentioned, he feeds off of that crowd, gets pretty much one of the biggest spots of his career here opening the pay-per-view. I do expect Bobby to win the fight at minus 140. I think I'm tempted to play him on the money line. I just think he's kind of better than Nasrat everywhere, especially in the wrestling, which we don't see Bobby Green go too often. Not someone who I necessarily trust to go out there and have the best game plans, considering all of his fights end up being close in the end. But Bobby just checks so many boxes. And when you just look at like the stats, you look at his whole body of work. Yeah, he has some close decisions, but his strikes landed are almost 2 strike differential of 2 more strikes landed per minute than he absorbs. Averages like a takedown and a half. Nasrat looked really poor in the grappling against Dan Hooker. I thought kind of couldn't stop anything Dan was doing in that spot. Even the Hoffa Garcia fight, which he ended up winning in pretty dominant fashion. Like round 1, I didn't think Nasrat looked great either. I mean, this is by far would be his best win in the UFC, and I don't even think it's particularly close. I think his best win until now would probably be like Diakise early on in his career. So I don't know. I think Bobby wins here. I think he's better everywhere. I think he's got the wrestling on his side. I do have some worries that it ends up being a close fight. We are in Texas. For those of you who don't know, those are like some of the worst judges in the country. That commission is really poor, but can't really build that into the handicap. I guess there's a 50% chance they score the fight for the wrong guy in my favor and a 50% chance they do it in the other guy's favor. But I do think Bobby Green gets the job done this weekend. I do think it'll be by decision. So I played goes the distance minus 162 for 2 units, and I may add a little bit of Bobby Green in the minus 140 range. John, and hop on the train with you as well. Anything here to add on Green versus Haqparast, or should we move on?
No, it sounds like we're all on the Bobby Green train, which you love to see it. I hope he gets it done on the pay-per-view.
You always love to see. I mean, Bobby Green is just like my favorite fighter, and I'm not even really sure it's close. Let's move on to Kyler Phillips against Marcelo Rojo here. Phillips minus 425 favorite, Rojo plus 320. DK prices have Kyler 9.4K and Rojo is 6.8. I'll go first here, John, because my breakdown is pretty short. I don't think Marcelo Rojo is very good, and I think this is a spot where he's moving down in weight to go fight Kyler. I'm not a huge fan of Kyler in general, but he does a lot of things pretty well. I thought he was a little bit overhyped as a prospect. Obviously, drew against Paiva his last time out, but that was a spot against Paiva where I really feel as though, he deserved to get the win. He was doing so much damage. He gassed out and ended up losing the decision, mostly because he gassed himself out doing so much damage, which is something we talked about kind of with Carlos Olberg. So I feel for him a little bit in that regard. Doesn't have the best cardio in the world, but like skill for skill, he's just way better than Marcelo Rojo. Rojo is someone who struggled a lot with grappling. I think he's lost 5 of his fights by submission. Kyler lands takedowns every fight. He's got some grappling chops. I've seen some submission props like plus 550 on Phillips. I think those are probably worth playing. It's kind of one of the only prop bets that's kind of piqued my interest this week, but not a fight where I have a ton of interest on the money line. Not a guy in Kyler Phillips that I'm comfortable laying minus 400 with, but at the same time, probably a more accurate price than not most of the time. So no play for me here, but I'm likely to add a little bit, maybe a half unit on Phillips by sub in the plus 500 to plus 600 range. John, anything for you here in Phillips versus Rojo?
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat as you. I think Phillips pretty much dominates here, but we kind of need to pump the brakes if you're thinking about like parlaying him or whatever, because we've seen him do this before where he's a big favorite. He blows his load in the first round, doesn't get the finish, and then doesn't have the cardio to win the fight. Like he almost finished Paiva and then came back, and by the time round 2 started, like he was completely gassed. And yes, he tried to, gut it out for the 15 minutes. Some people thought maybe he won or it should have been a draw, whatever. But regardless, we know he doesn't have the highest fight IQ, and maybe that changes this time around, but I kind of think it doesn't. That's sort of how Phillips has fought all of his fights. But to your point, he's going to land takedowns here. He's a black belt, much better grappler than Rojo, who does struggle with his defensive grappling. So I think the sub path is there. I think, a ground and pound knockout is there as well. Phillips is just another guy, like similar to Casey O'Neill, where it's like, if they get in a favorable spot on the mat, like they're more than likely going to finish the fight, or at least be super aggressive in trying to finish the fight. So yeah, I think Phillips rolls here. I wouldn't trust him at the money line, but I do think more than likely he probably finds a finish. He's another strong play on DraftKings, but there's so many in that expensive range that we're just going to have to make some decisions on Saturday.
I agree. Let's move on here. We got 3 fights left. We got Jared Cannonier minus 160 favorite here against Derek Brunson. Cannonier minus 160, 8.6K. Brunson comes back plus 140, 7.6K. Cannonier has put together a pretty good streak here in this division. I think this is kind of a clear number 1 contenders fight. His win streak is not nearly what Blonde Brunson's win streak is, as he's put together some pretty impressive wins as a betting underdog. So shout out to Derek Brunson for that. I will say that I backed Brunson in the past. I thought he's been value in a lot of spots. I think this is a tough matchup for him against Jared Cannonier this weekend. Cannonier is someone who has a really strong kicking game for this weight class. He's obviously come all the way down from heavyweight to now fighting at middleweight. Super strong guy for this weight class. His takedown defense is not great, although his first level takedown defense is decent. You can get him to the ground. You can string takedowns together against this guy, which I expect Derek Brunson to be able to, have some success. Derek Brunson, I think, is clearly the best pure wrestler at middleweight. But Cannonier's just so explosive getting back to his feet. You look at the David Branch fight, just one off the top of my head, where like Cannonier gets taken down, I think, twice in the first minute of the fight, just kind of explodes back to his feet. And, Brunson's good in top control. He does some damage on top. But I kind of feel like Cannonier's going to put him out at some point. We know Brunson can be a bit of a loose cannon at points. He's gotten a little bit better about that. But look, I'm rooting for Derek Brunson. I don't think there's necessarily value in the line. I was hoping that we would get a playable line here in either the decision only or finish only market, because I feel like Derek Brunson should actually be a favorite if this fight hits the scorecards. But I also think that Cannonier has like 75 to 80% of the finishing equity here. Unfortunately, it looked like all the sports books, the whole market was on top of kind of what I was thinking. So I was hoping to have a prop play or a derivative play in this fight. Couldn't really find anything that I thought had carried value. So I'll just be rooting for Derek Brunson, but I think the money line is pretty accurate. I'll pick Jared Cannonier to win by knockout, but I do think Brunson has some serious upside at $7,600 on DK, despite there being such a big fighter pool. A win for him likely includes 3 or more takedowns, and at $7,600, there's no guarantee that there will be a lot of fighters even getting a win bonus in that price range. I think Brunson is certainly live this weekend, but for sure a deserved favorite against Cannonier. So, John, thoughts here on this number one contender matchup at middleweight?
Yeah, I talked about in the Maxim Grisham fight, and I bring that up because Jared Cannonier is similar in that he's low volume, relies on big moments, never looks to wrestle and grapple. Obviously, he's much better than Grisham, so I don't want to put him down too much. And I do think his finishing equity is much, much higher, especially in this matchup. But I bring that up because he's just not a good minute winner. So I'm almost never backing those guys, especially if you have to pay a juice tag on him. Like I'm just always going to side with the wrestler more than likely, but it's a huge concern. I didn't back Derek Brunson here. I am going to have some DraftKings exposure, but I mean the durability is a major concern, always has been knocked out 5 times, even in the fights where, we've cashed multiple tickets on this show on Derek Brunson. And sorry, my dog's scratching the rug in the background if you hear that. But we've cashed multiple tickets on Brunson. I don't think this is a spot where, it's just not the same spot. Like a lot of those other guys, Kevin Holland, we knew he was going to spend most of the round on his back. I'm not convinced that the takedowns are going to come so easy for Derek Brunson here. Over on Underdog, I played the under 2.5 takedowns on Derek Brunson's prop line over there. You shout out to me, little plug. You can go check out the Underdog video on my YouTube page. But yeah, Cannonier, most of his takedowns that, I know UFC has him at like 60% or whatever, 60 something, but most of those came at heavyweight, like at light heavyweight, most of those came at light heavyweight. At middleweight, he's actually had pretty good takedown defense, very good takedown defense. And I just don't think that, Brunson, even if he does land a takedown or two, and maybe he does, I don't think he's going to be able to repeatedly do that without getting hurt. Even in those previous fights, some of the ones that we cashed, it was like he was winning and he was wrestling and he was clearly winning the fight, but man, did it get dicey because it seemed like every time he got hit, he's wobbled, he's like off balance. So it's just a super, if you're backing him, I think you're going to have a pretty sweaty Saturday night. And I'm just not looking to do that. I want a nice, relaxing, stress-free evening. So I'm not going to back Derek Brunson this week. I hope he wins like you, but I don't know, man. I kind of think he gets knocked out here.
Yeah, a nice relaxing Saturday night that hopefully involves some 19-1 underdog parlays for both of us. That's what I'm looking forward to. Let's move on to the co-main event here. We got the heavyweights. Derek Lewis -170 in his hometown of Houston. He's $8,800 against Tai Tuivasa, who comes back plus 150. Plus 157.4K for Tai on DraftKings. And this is about as excited as I've been for a heavyweight fight in a long time. And I also have zero interest in betting it. I've sworn I'm not going to do the whole Derek Lewis thing, and shout out to me for not betting against him his last fight. Of course, I would never make any money on Derek Lewis because I've never bet on him. But I was tempted by Chris Daukaus. I passed. So shout out to me for that. I'm going to pass again here. Derek Lewis is someone who been around a really long time. We know his game plan. He's going to sit there. He kind of has this magical power where people don't throw against him. He's going to look to counter you. Hopefully hits you with an overhand. If you put on a lot of pressure and break him, he will quit. And if not, you will probably go to a very boring decision. And Tai Tuivasa, I actually think that Tai is a little bit underrated in terms of his tool set at heavyweight. Someone who has decent Muay Thai, his leg kicks are good. He works strong in the clinch with his elbows. Really impressive knockout victory against Augusto Sakai. Obviously, we've always known Tai has knockout power, but he outpointed him in the first round. I thought the first round was a really good visual for Tai in that matchup. I think his leg kicks here are going to be the deciding factor. He's done a lot of damage to fighters via those leg kicks, but Derek Lewis hasn't taken leg kicks great in the past. But one thing I will say is Tai tends to throw naked leg kicks, which are really easy to counter. Derek Lewis's game is predicated on countering his opponents. I would not be surprised at all if he was to counter a low kick and put Tai Tuivasa out. So I know a lot of people have takes on like the over 1.5 rounds or the fight going. to the second round or the under. I just would prefer to just not get involved. I hope it's fun. I hope we don't see like a boring slot fest. I hope someone wins and does a fun interview afterwards. And the fans will win and I will have zero action on this fight. I just don't think it's one where I have an edge whatsoever. So, John, I'll kick it to you. Anything for you here in the co-main event?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you, but I'm also more tempted, I think, to get some action on the Tai Tuivasa side. It's just one of those things where it's like, I think both guys are going to stand and bang, and both guys have almost the same finishing equity. Might as well take the plus 150. That's sort of how I'm viewing it. You mentioned the leg kicks of Tuivasa. I think that could be a factor here. I don't really think either guy's going to look to wrestle here. So I think it's just a spot where, both of them are entertaining fighters, great personalities, but they both love to put on a show for the fans. So I'm hoping, and I kind of think that they're going to just agree to just slug it out, and whoever falls first loses. And so I don't know, man. I like the fan in me, and I'm a fan of both guys, but I want to see a shoey. I want to have a plus 150 or whatever. If I see a shoey, I want to be holding that plus money ticket. So I don't know. Come Saturday, I might have some sort of play on Tuivasa, whether I play him money line or a prop. I just hope we don't see like a boring slop fest, low volume decision.
Yeah, and shout out to Mystic Sosa in the chat who says, I don't see Lewis losing anyone but Blades, Francis, Stipe, or John Jones. One thing I will give Derek Lewis credit for is he seems to beat everyone who is not in the elite of this division. Obviously, Cyril Gahn is missing from that message, who just beat Derek Lewis a few weeks ago. But you go back and look at the people Derek Lewis has lost to is like JDS, Daniel Cormier, Mark Hunt. Like these are the elite of the elite at heavyweight at that time. And so I'll give him credit for that. Lewis tends to get the job done when he faces lesser competition, but something about me, the nerd in me just can't seem to wrap my head around him being minus 200 in these minus 200 favorite, in these matchups where it kind of just seems like it's 50-50. One man will fall. I do think Tai Tuivasa is pretty shitty defense at heavyweight. Saw him get clipped for sure in the Greg Hardy fight prior to putting Greg Hardy out cold. And it's just one of those things where I think Lewis will get his opportunities to land cleanly. And when he does, that usually ends in a KO win. But man, I hope Tai gets it done. Not that I dislike Derek Lewis. I just think Tai Tuivasa is like the most fun heavyweight on the roster. So that does it for the co-main event, where it sounds like neither of us have really any interest in getting involved in the betting market. Not sure the same could be said here for the main event, where we got Israel Adesanya, currently minus 290 favorite, $9,200 against Robert Whittaker, who comes back the Reaper, plus 230, 7K flat on DK. Obviously a rematch of a fight that went down about 2.5 years ago. Adesanya basically knocked out Whittaker twice in that match. I've heard him really bad at the end of round one, and then obviously put him out about halfway through round two. That is when he claimed the undisputed belt from Robert Whittaker. Whittaker's put together pretty solid 3-fight win streak. It feels like Whittaker is clearly the second best middleweight on earth. I don't really think there's any dispute there. Clearly a step above everyone else in the division, Cannonier and Brunson included. But he hasn't been able to solve this Izzy puzzle yet. He's only had 8 minutes to do it. Like I mentioned, got hurt early in the fight. Makes it difficult to come back. But I guess my question to you here, John, I'll let you go first, is like, what do you think has changed for Robert Whittaker between the first two fights? And then kind of how do you see it playing out this time as opposed to the first time? Because I think we're in agreement that it likely isn't going to be as easy for Izzy as it was, what was that, like 25, 28 months ago. So what do you think's changed for Whittaker here? Do you think he has a shot to pull off the upset? Clearly a really talented fighter to get at plus 230. I'm just not sure this is the matchup that's going to be winnable for him a large portion of the time.
Yeah, I think for starters, the first thing that's changed is the betting odds, right? Because Izzy closed as a small favorite, like minus 130 or whatever the first time around. And now you mention it, like he's approaching minus 300. So for starters, that
I think
that
Izzy might have closed
my
a
interest.
dog, honestly.
Oh, really?
Maybe he closed minus 126 on sharp books, but
Yeah.
it was throughout fight week, like he was plus 110, and then it switched. Regardless, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but it was a closely lined fight the first time out, not so much this time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people are like, well, Izzy just knocked him out the first time. He's going to dominate and knock him out again. And I just wouldn't be so sure. Like, I think Robert Whittaker, if you go back and watch the first fight, and obviously things have changed since then, but like it really wasn't as much of a blowout as the result would indicate. Like I thought Robert Whittaker was winning that first round up until the last 10 seconds when he got flash knocked out. And then I really don't think he recovered from that. It just seemed like he was kind of, there, but he wasn't fully there in the second round. And then obviously like the first big exchange ended up getting dropped again. So it's just one of those things where he got clipped. You can't fault him too much for it. I thought he came in with a good game plan, mostly staying on the outside. When he does blitz forward, he's looking to land multiple times. He just, he overextended many times in that fight. He paid the price for it. Like, I'm not going to fault him too much for it. I do think the other thing that's changed since then is in that first fight, leading up to the fight, there was a lot of talk of, maybe he'll look to grapple here. He definitely has a wrestling advantage, definitely has a grappling advantage. He has that in his back pocket. Maybe he'll look to do that against Izzy. And we know that he didn't. He didn't shoot a single takedown. And I think that's something that changes with this fight. Before that Izzy fight in Australia, he landed 4 takedowns across 13 UFC fights. So it just wasn't, he always has had okay wrestling, if he can get into the clinch, but it hasn't been like a notable game plan for him. Like I said, only landed 4 takedowns. Most he's ever attempted in those first 13 fights was 2 in any fight and never landed more than 1 takedown. Since that Izzy fight, he's shot 22 takedowns. He's landed 6 across his previous 3 fights. So it's clear that that's becoming more of a game plan, and everything's always matchup dependent, but clearly he's looking to use his wrestling a little bit more. And I think that's important here because him and his team, clearly they're going to watch the tape. They know Izzy struggles with that. Marvin Vettori was able to be competitive by landing multiple takedowns. Obviously, when Izzy went up to 205 against Jan Blachowicz, and I know that's obviously different. Jan Blachowicz
Right.
much bigger, but I do still think it matters. And I think that's going to be a clear game plan for Robert Whittaker is to not just only try to wrestle, but at least if he's threatening the wrestling, even if he's not successful, like I think he can land a takedown or 2 here. And I don't even expect him to control Izzy for that much on the mat because Izzy has improved his get-up game, his grappling. Like, I don't think it's going to be like a blowout if he gets him down. I just think the threat of the takedowns is going to change a lot of the striking dynamics. Like, Izzy's not just going to be able to sit back and wait for the big counter shot like he did the first time. So all that being said, I think Robert Whittaker, I think there is value on the money line. I haven't played him yet. I am going to. I'm kind of waiting for FanDuel to catch up to the market because right now, if you like the Izzy side, FanDuel has the best price available. So I'm kind of just waiting for them to catch up to the rest of the market so that I can get involved on Robert Whittaker. But yeah, man, I just think it's going to be a lot more competitive than people think. I think the first fight was more competitive than people think, even though he got knocked out. Obviously, you can get knocked out here. Adesanya is one of the best strikers to ever do it. Like, I'm not denying any of that. It's just, we know he's not invincible. And we've seen that in multiple times now. And I think Robert Whittaker has enough tools to make this a much more competitive fight than a plus 230 would indicate.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I like that you mentioned kind of best price available is like minus 280 on FanDuel. You can get Rob about plus 230 elsewhere, which sounds like the side you like for sure this weekend. I think you did a great job outlining. I think this is a situation, John, where it's similar to kind of Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman, a little bit different now that they've completed their rematch and the result didn't really change following the first fight. But it feels like these are 2 of the clear top guys, and any fight that Covington took or any fight that Whittaker takes, it just doesn't feel like they're that challenge in the weight class. So their only goal is like coming out with a game plan that's going to be more effective against this guy that's pretty much their kryptonite. So I do think, Whittaker's worked on his wrestling a lot. One thing I will say about Whittaker's wrestling and takedowns is he's kind of tends to go for them late in the fight, like against Kelvin Gastelum when he was already clearly up 4-0, landed 2 takedowns in the last round. Similar with Darren Till, which was a little different because that fight was more competitive headed into round 5, kind of helped to put a stamp on things when he landed 2 takedowns, his only 2 takedowns of that fight in the final round, did Rob. But I think it's interesting the type of takedowns we're looking at because originally everyone was like, oh, you got to take down Israel Adesanya when he gets to the UFC. It's going to be so easy. And people quickly learn like it's not going to. Izzy has really great takedown defense, specifically against the cage fence. I know his last time out, Vettori was able to get him down once or twice, even against the fence. That's because Vettori was, shooting like power doubles and then would drive him into the cage and would get Izzy down. The problem with Whittaker is a lot of his takedowns are single legs. And I'm not sure he's going to be able to get Izzy down with a single leg in the middle of the cage. And Rob's wrestling against the cage isn't necessarily as good as I think it needs to be in order to get a guy like Adesanya down too many times. That said, John, like you mentioned, just the threat of having a takedown, the threat of switching up a game plan, I think will most certainly play to the advantage of Robert Whittaker. One thing I want to talk about is just the striking mismatch here, because I think Rob is a great striker in his own right. I think he's probably the second best striker in the division. He's just so well-rounded. Just in terms of the matchup, we talk about, everything is matchup dependent, and that matters a lot with styles, but it also matters with like techniques within a style. So if you look at strictly striking, Rob is so blitz based. Like all of his striking attacks come with a 1-2, and then he hides the head kick behind it. And it's not that he does it over and over or he's predictable or anything like that, but he's very much a blitz based fighter. Like he'll just rush in on you and catches you off guard. Adesanya plays so well to the countering game against that style, and we saw that against Rob. I honestly thought Rob was like a little bit anxious, more blitzing even than normal in the first Adesanya fight. And like you mentioned, John, he was still competitive for the first 4 minutes and 55 seconds of that matchup. I just think as time goes on and Izzy makes his read on the feet, I think the mismatch on the feet will be bigger than people expect it to be down the stretch, but I don't think the wrestling mismatch will be as big as people think. I do think that Rob is more likely to spend time on top position here, but if they were to like purely grapple, man, Izzy's grappling is getting good. Like he reversed Vettori a few times. I think Vettori's a better grappler than Whittaker is. Like I don't think that Rob is gonna be able to get meaningful top control time. And if you think the striking is close and his just takedown attempts and maybe getting him down once or twice is enough to do the trick, like you seem to think, John, then yeah, I think Rob's live underdog. But to me, I think that the mismatch on the feet is going to be pretty stark, especially as Izzy makes his read. He's a guy who gets stronger throughout the fight. I think he'll be there to counter Rob pretty much all day, every time he blitzes. So I'll pick Israel Adesanya. I have a lot of respect for Rob Whittaker's game. Certainly can't fault anyone for playing him at a plus 230 price. He's about as good a fighter you'll see outside of Colby Covington with this type of price next to his name. So don't blame people for taking the shot. I'm not laying any chalk with Israel Adesanya because I do acknowledge that there's a clear path to victory for Rob, but I expect Izzy to get the job done. I think it'll be a decision, but certainly should be a closer fight than the first one, at least in terms of the results. So I'm excited to watch it go down this weekend in Houston. John, anything for you to add here on the main event or anything else we talked about? If not, my friend, take us out of here.
No, I think it's going to be a fun card. We hit on that, earlier. 15 fights on DraftKings. Obviously, if you feel strongly about somebody, don't be afraid to hammer them because you're just going to get more leverage with more fighters. There are obviously ownership's going to be more spread out. I love these type of weeks. They do get a little crazy because you literally need the nuts because with 15 fights, there's going to be somebody that outscores you more than likely. So just keep that in mind. But it's going to be a fun slate, guys. I don't have anything else to add, but do me a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It is much appreciated. I'm John Kelly. That's Jon and Shiffman. This is the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network, saying goodbye and good luck, and we will see you guys next time.